Hi, welcome to Lean Blog Interviews. I'm Mark Graban. We are joined today for the fifth time in this podcast series by my good friend and colleague, Karen Martin. Karen, how are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
Doing well. You know, on Saturday Night Live, they give five-time hosts like a special jacket. There's a
Right.
five-timers club. I don't have a jacket, but
I want your zero hat.
welcome to the club. Yeah, my zero hat for those who aren't watching on YouTube. I'm not wearing it because I think I'm a zero. It's a hat from the exact name is the Patient Safety Movement Foundation, an organization, a nonprofit that is really focused on trying to move healthcare towards zero harm. That maybe we can talk about that here today because that's a controversial concept sometimes to think about zero defects.
Mhm.
Zero harm. Is that possible? Is that inspiring? Is it demotivating? But I like to wear the hat as a conversation starter. Like, hey, actually, someone did ask me earlier, what's that zero mean?
Yeah, it's a great conversation starter. Zero has, some charge to it.
It does. So I think I'll make a note. We're going to come back to a related topic later on in the episode. But if you don't know Karen, and I'm sure a lot of you do, among other things, Karen is the founder and CEO of TKMG. She's also the founder and CEO of TKMG Academy, a great online learning platform. We're going to talk about that today. She's author of books including The Outstanding Organization, Clarity First, value stream mapping, just among those. Is there anything else you would add kind of about your background and bio, Karen?
No, other than maybe yes. The one thing that I think drives me toward this topic of mistake proofing is that I started with in operations design, but specifically the quality improvement side of it. So, I was kind of very, very quality focused long before I, fell into lean thinking and lean management systems. And so, quality has always been a big concern of mine. So therefore, mistakes
Yeah.
and erosion of quality have always been, something I'm passionate about solving and
Yeah.
helping others solve.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, it's so core in lean or the Toyota production system of trying to build in quality at the source. Like I'm a Deming geek going back to before learning about Toyota, and Dr. Deming would certainly talk about the need to eliminate inspection and not just getting rid of inspection, but by building in quality through different kind of rigorous methods and culture as we'll chat about here today. I mean, the two pillars of the Toyota way: just in time, think about flow and on-time delivery and small batches and things like that. The other pillar, of course, is built-in quality or quality at the source. As we, I think some people overlook that. They say, "Well, lean is all about speed and flow and efficiency." And I'm like, no. Karen's rolling her eyes and shaking her head.
Yeah, you can't go fast if you have poor quality. You have to do rework or scrap, which is wasteful and blah blah blah. So it's I don't know where that ever started from, but it's not true.
No, it's a mistake. I think to
It's a
frame
mistake.
it, it's factually incorrect. That's one type of mistake. It's just being factually wrong about something. But one reason Karen and I are doing the podcast, I mean, we chat a lot. What did you call it, Karen? Just an ongoing
An
podcast?
ongoing podcast, a life of podcasts between us.
There's times though I'm glad. I mean, we can speak candidly. We it's good. Not. I mean, when we're not recording, I mean, we'll try to be candid here. But life would be different if you were constantly being recorded and
Oh,
filmed. But we do have a lot of great conversations over time, and I'm glad we could do another podcast together here. But one reason we're doing that is that Karen invited me to work with her on a course for TKMG Academy. It's called Mistake Proofing. We wrote it together. I'm the one on camera. Whether that's whether you like watching or listening to me or not, I'm the one on the camera
you're
reading.
excellent on
Uh,
camera.
uh,
Excellent, excellent partner all the way around.
that was a new experience, so I'm trying to get more comfortable with that. But that course is available now, tkmgacademy.com, and we'll put links in the show notes. So I'll stop I probably crossed that line from being self-effacing into being too self-critical. So I will put that behind me. I mean, I think the course turned out great. It was great collaboration. But Karen, I was going to ask you. You've already touched on a little bit why quality is such a passion of yours. But why was this topic something that you wanted to add into the TKMG Academy catalog?
There were several reasons. I mean, one is that my whole goal in life is to make work easier, safer, better for people, and I believe and have certainly experienced over and over and over that you can get that, and companies can also profit greatly, and customers can have just incredible loyalty toward an organization because of how they're being treated and feel about the product or service that's being used. They're using, and so there's just all this muck that can happen when you have a mistake oriented, error prone organization, and much of it is very solvable, not marginally solvable, but incredibly solvable. And yes, I know we're going to get to the zero concept at some point. And so I just would I have a passion for getting people to understand not only what it's doing to them, really what it's doing to the organization to have high degrees of errors or mistakes, and also that there's so much you can do about it. And some of it is actually remarkably simple if you just learn develop the way to see what's really going on and then do something about it.
Yeah. And that's a key mindset of just thinking or believing that the problem is solvable. Because I hear a lot of self-defeating, self-fulfilling prophecy. There's a lot of this in healthcare where people look at things like medical errors, hospital-acquired infections, and people will throw their hands up and say things like, well, it's unfortunate, it's sad, I wish it wasn't there, but it's always been, and our patients are really sick. And and I think people kind of convince themselves it helps them feel better of like, well, we're all smart, we're caring. If it was solvable, we would have solved it by now. But then I think the rub is you can point to organizations that have solved some of these problems: surgical site infections, hospital acquired infections of different types, different errors. So, I mean, I think people have got to look to see, if it's possible somewhere. I'd like to think it's possible more places, and we got to get past that, right?
Yeah, it's the healthcare paradigm is just so dangerous on so many levels and so unfortunate, because it's not only the people that are the subject or the victims of mistakes and errors that are happening, it's the workers themselves. I mean, I don't know one soul that has gone into healthcare that just doesn't care passionately for what their calling is, and they want to do a good job, and they want to be able to do what they went into healthcare to do. And so, we need to get out of the way and let them do what they went into healthcare to do, which is to, help people have better quality of lives and save lives in some cases. And, so it's unfortunate, and it is solvable. And hopefully people will either read your book, The Mistakes That Make Us, or they'll take the course, or they'll Google, or whatever they do to, get reinvigorated and get restored hope that, yes, you can do something about this. You really can. Most errors are solvable. So it's if nothing else, I hope that this podcast generates a little bit of excitement about that.
Yeah. Well, and I hope people do both, of reading the book and doing the course. There's some overlap between the two, but it's different topics delivered in different formats. Hope people will check that out. But a couple other thoughts come to mind. Of people wondering, is it solvable? People will refer to human error, and that doesn't mean to me that the human is the root cause, right? There's root causes, or to me, human factors, or our human nature is that we get distracted, fatigued. We get bored sometimes with work, or there's all these different factors we could point back and say, well, those are maybe primarily systemic factors that they can be addressed systemically. I've heard people say things like, I don't know if you've heard this, Karen, they'll say, well, it's human error. We're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. So what can you do? I'm like,
I hear it a lot.
Right? I mean, do something. don't just throw your hands up and say it's not solvable. Companies that really embrace systemic mistake proofing make great strides in that. Like, what can you do? Figure that out. Run some experiments. Use some methods and some mindsets that'll get
Yeah,
you.
and I'm sure we're going to touch on this, is that, the cultural element of that, what can you do, is critical. It's not only the mechanics of how do you actually prevent the errors from happening, which is oftentimes process design related, work system design, work environment design. There's all kinds of reasons. There's a human factor that may play a factor as well, like if someone's fatigued or hungry, or any number of things that can play a role too. But the culture has to support the interest in and ability to do something about them,
Yeah.
and you do a great job in both the book and the course explaining that whole psychological safety need that we have in order to have mistakes come to the surface. And so, back to your comment about healthcare and medication error reduction, the reporting of those errors needs to actually go up initially so that you can get to common root causes for the errors and do something about them, and go through scientific problem solving, disciplined problem solving.
Right.
And so the culture has to support the discovery of, and then the resolution of these mistakes.
Yeah. Another way of saying it is shifting from discipline and punishment to disciplined problem solving.
Yes, I like that. That's good.
Different way of saying that. But I mean, you think about mistakes, the probably non physically harmful or deadly category. I don't know if you saw in the news, I'm just throwing this at you here, that there's an airport in Japan. This was in the news in a couple places recently. Kansai International Airport near Osaka has been open for like 30 years. And they claim, and this sounds unbelievable, but they're really putting the stake in the ground and talking about it, and that they've never lost a bag in 30 years.
Wow.
And they probably use a lot of the same technology. U.S. carriers use barcode scanning on the bags, and I think they've thrown technology at it. But what I remember from like the NPR piece was somebody from the airport talking about things like process and purpose. And like, it sounds like, this culture that, some of it they framed as, okay, yeah, that's Japanese hospitality of like really, really, really caring for a customer and tourists. And, they have a lot of pride in thinking about their role. It's not just the physical movement of the bag. It's supporting somebody who's traveling maybe into the country or around the country, and it contributes to their experience. And like, wow, like, just, it sounds like, a matter of culture and process. It wasn't something that they bought and installed.
Yeah, and I think the danger of talking about having that human element as core in the whole mistake proofing arena is that I've heard several leaders say, well, that's going to cost too much. It's going to cost too much to put the people in place to handle problems at their core. And usually when I hear that, and I'm usually somewhat aware of the problem and the mistakes and the root causes for them when we're having these conversations, it doesn't take really all that much extra money. It really doesn't. Sometimes it's usually technology, if you're going to bring in technology that costs anything at all. But sometimes it's just process design or the lack thereof. And often. And so when leaders say that, I'm like, no, do you know that? Have you actually gone through root cause analysis and gotten to the core of what's going on? And have you explored all the potential countermeasures you can put in place to at least reduce, if not eliminate? And, the answer is usually no. And I'm like, well, then, come on, give it a chance.
Yeah. And I mean, there's these complicated dynamics when, you were talking about quality, and I think even with safety, we're focusing on that and making great strides and engaging people in the process, strengthens their commitment to the team, to the organization. It's not just a simple cost benefit analysis. I think it's more complex than that. And back to the zero hat for a minute, the late Paul O'Neill, as CEO of Alcoa and later in his work, was such an advocate and a leader for working towards zero harm. And he I remember, things that he would talk about, where he would tell people at Alcoa, don't let budget become an excuse for not implementing something for safety. I don't think it was a complete full blank check, but I do remember him saying that, he told his safety people or finance people, if you start calculating ROI on this, I will fire you. Because
Good.
to him, it was really based on principles. And I think, commitment to the employees and how that gets repaid through people's participation in improvement. And Alcoa was wildly successful during those years. It wasn't a trade-off between safety and financial performance.
And the customers of whatever that good or service is that's being produced, that the safety of those folks also, it gets back to respect for people, the fundamental, element of what makes lean, when it's done well and its core, so powerful that drives decisions much of the time.
Yeah.
And it's a more humanistic way to get really good work done at a decent price point that people will pay for, and gain market share.
Yeah. And you and I have talked a lot offline about mistakes, and you've shared with me how you're even more focused on this, and you notice opportunities or a lack of mistake proofing, or you can sometimes see mistake proofing. But I think of like going to Starbucks, and I think the level of process depends partly on the impact of the mistake. So I've been waiting in line for Starbucks, and they've called out Mark, and I thought no, it was actually for another Mark. Or a different Mark came up and grabbed and took a sip of my drink, and I'm like, oh, that's not right. Like, it's probably not worth doing like a hospital of saying, well, you need to use two identifiers. So like Mark born in October 24th. Huh? What?
You can't get your coffee until you show your driver's license.
Yeah, we're not checking ID. They're not scanning our app as we pick up. The scan is just for the payment. I think there, processes in hospitals like medication administration need to have so much more attention. When you think of what's the worst that could happen, somebody who really doesn't want caffeine might get a caffeinated drink instead of uncaffeinated. Hopefully there's not like any medical risk, or if somebody had that level of risk, they might want to see the person pouring it directly, to try to check for that. But for most customers, it probably doesn't merit that level of mistake proofing, because I think with Starbucks margins, they'll dump a drink and remake it,
right,
without giving it too much thought. But that's cost, right?
Yeah.
So there's financial impact,
right. Yeah, but I don't get the sense that Starbucks does that willy-nilly. They're not just like dumping drinks, every 2 seconds. There's purpose behind their movements and their decisions and their actions and all that stuff. So, yeah, I get obsessed with it. So first of all, I think that just generally speaking, anyone who's interested in improvement and process design and all of that, it's a career hazard that you can't not see it.
Yeah.
Once you learn how to see waste, you can't unsee waste. And so what's sometimes challenging is having patience with the situation, and not just like wanting to get my mapping paper out and post it and start fixing it. It's very tempting.
Send them a consulting proposal.
Yeah, it's very tempting when you see waste so rampant, but quality as well. It's to know what we know, and what others hopefully will learn if they don't already know it, is that it is solvable. And so it's hard to see it continue when it can be solved. And one more thing that you just kind of touched on that I want to go into a little more deeply is this thing about respect for people. When people have a frustrating day at work, that has all kinds of ripple effects into their families, into society. It can be a really big deal to come home from work drained. And people think, it's a job, you're drained. No. Coming home from work drained and not having your tank filled up, and instead having it depleted, has all kinds of ripple effects inside families and communities and friendships and all kinds of things.
And physical health.
Yeah, and physical health. And so every time someone makes a mistake, unless they're a sociopath, and there are a couple of those in companies, not in every company, thankfully, but there are a few running around there. People care passionately about doing a good job, and doing a poor job feels terrible. And and so, and it's even more terrible when they didn't have anything to do with the mistake in the first place.
Right.
They either weren't properly trained, or there's no standard work saying what they should do, or the equipment's not working, or what, you name it. They're forced to make a substitution, whatever it is, that feels crappy. People
Mm-hmm.
want to do a good job, and, we're obligated to make that environment so that can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I've kind of experienced and, discovered in recent years is it's one thing to not get upset when somebody makes a mistake, but sometimes you have to go beyond that and recognize and have empathy for that person feeling bad,
Mhm.
even when you've said, well, that wasn't your fault, or they're still feeling bad, or they're wondering, well, yeah, no, I'm putting this on myself.
Mhm.
I feel like it's my fault, and giving someone the space to get past being upset about it, even when that's like kind of self-imposed, as opposed to situations where they got yelled at or they got in trouble.
Right. Yeah, and I think that there are times when it's pretty impossible to get past it quickly, and
Mhm.
other times when it calls for passing quickly. I mean, if you do harm to someone else because of something that your hands touched or your mind made a decision about, I think it's okay to feel bad about it. It's not okay to stew on it, and
Mhm.
it's not okay to blame oneself when the organization's, processes or the work systems maybe didn't support the opposite outcome, the good outcome. But it's okay to feel bad for a little while, but only
Mhm.
a little while, and then
Yeah.
gonna move on, and put that energy toward actually solving the problem
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
caused.
And sometimes it takes a couple of minutes, sometimes it takes an hour. Some situations in healthcare, when a healthcare professional is involved in a systematic mistake that harms somebody or almost harms somebody, that they're sometimes referred to as the second victim.
Right.
And sometimes you need counseling resources or EAP program to help somebody process
Yeah.
and get past something kind of traumatic.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a whole spectrum of, little effect versus, life ending effect.
Yeah. Yeah. But you mentioned training, and to me, that's totally a systemic factor. When we look at process design, staffing levels, equipment design, all these different things, I'm going to bring it back to the more lighthearted topic around Starbucks again. Like, I think of one time, I love the nitro cold brew beverage,
Mm-hmm.
which is always served without ice because
Mm-hmm.
it's nitrogenated, it's foamy, and it's cold enough as it's being poured. And I ordered it once, and the barista working there poured it over ice, and I said, "Oh, this isn't supposed to have ice." And then I overheard the interaction between that barista and someone else of like, clearly this woman was new on the job and she hadn't been trained to know that. And it's almost like they were training her by correcting different mistakes. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, how is that making her
Yeah.
feel? They could have more proactively kind of laid that out for her or been supervising and coaching. Okay, you're going to make this now. This doesn't have ice. The regular cold brew does. Don't make that mistake. I felt bad for the barista more than I wasn't upset because they'll dump it out and give you
Right.
the right drink the right way.
Well, again, respect for people. I mean, that's not fair to do that to an employee. Starbucks is such an interesting case study and I am in Starbucks a fair amount, like you,
Mhm.
and I listen a lot, and I ask a lot of questions too.
Yeah,
I'm a nosy customer, and
yeah,
so I remember back in the day when Starbucks was relatively new. I used to see the training. I used to see it being done in the lobby during quiet periods. I used to overhear it. I used to see their materials, and it was stellar, and it
hmm
was consistent. And I happen to love a tall soy misto with 2 raw sugars. It's off
yeah.
menu.
What's a miso?
It's off menu. It's like Olay, basically. It's steamed milk
Okay,
and coffee, not espresso.
okay,
And
okay.
that used to be precise, beyond precise at any Starbucks in the world, not just
hmm
US, in the world, because their one standard was you fill the coffee up to the siren's eye on the
Yeah,
the siren that was on the cup.
uh-huh. Yeah,
And because of that, no matter what size cup it was, the milk proportion was exactly right and the
hmm
same everywhere. And then, over the years, I started tasting these wickedly different, flavors to my soy misto. And I finally started asking people, do you know about the siren's eye? No one.
Yeah.
Do you know about the siren's eye? No one. And so, it may be for a different reason. Maybe they changed the width of the cup, and no longer was a siren's eye the place.
Well, they changed
I
the
don't know.
logo. They got rid of the old siren in the Starbucks
Maybe
logo.
that's why. But it's really interesting to me that I have observed, and I have more than just a few data points on this, that their standards of training and documented work and all that stuff have slipped tremendously, in my opinion.
Well, no, I mean, I think have moved away from. There was a period 15 years ago, roughly, when Starbucks was really into lean, and they were using TWI, training within
Mm,
industry, job instruction. They were coming to conferences and demonstrating how they teach
yeah,
job instruction. And yeah, I think something has slipped. There's been executive changes, and I
right.
think one of the key people who was a vice president who I'd met, who was one of the leaders of that whole initiative, left the company, and
Yeah,
it's a story we've heard so many times. These things can fade when leaders really aren't
yeah,
focusing on it anymore.
exactly. Exactly.
But we were going to talk about kind of a spectrum of mistake proofing. Like ideal and would be 100% prevention. Sometimes that happens through mechanical devices, electronic sensors, and sometimes we can only come up with something that reduces errors. So I think of like the Starbucks cup, and I did see something. They've redesigned their cold beverage cups again to have some of these lines and visual indicators.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that helps to have that standard, but somebody could still over pour or
Mm-hmm.
under pour. They could over pour and they're in a rush and like, well, I know standard might be to dump it out and start again, but we're really behind and the customer probably won't notice. Or, then there's like cultural elements
Mm-hmm.
involved. But I mean, I think instead of throwing our hands up and saying, "Well, people are sloppy pourers," I mean, I guess I'm not trying to push for automation, but an automated dispenser can
Yep.
be really precise. I've seen at a whiskey distillery, there's a machine that will put precisely 750 milliliters of liquid.
Yep.
That's hard to say sober after, let alone having. If I'd had a bourbon, maybe it's easier to say 750 milliliters.
Milliliters. Yeah.
Because for tax reasons, like that has to be very legally precise. They wouldn't have somebody hand funneling
Mm-hmm.
into the bottle. So there's that question of like, well, what do you automate because of quality, and then how do you treat people respectfully in that process?
Are you the one that told me about this machine? Back to coffee again. About the machine that is an automatic dispenser and it does everything. There's no human element in it. Was that you that told me about that, or was that someone else? There's
There's
there's no barista. There's just you go. It's self serve and it pours exactly the
well,
right amount every time of whatever you're getting, whether it's the flavor or the coffee or the milk or whatever.
I mean, there's certain vending machines, like the Cincinnati airport has, like a Lavazza espresso drink making machine that's automated. I'm sure that's engineered to be completely consistent.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to compare the quality, but then you think about the experience.
Hmm.
If you go in and have a drink or a pizza that's made by a robot as opposed to a person that you can interact with.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of factors around the experience, and like, okay, you don't want to spend money on the robots, and it might damage the customer experience.
Yeah.
We can think about how do you error proof the process and the training, along the way. One other thing I was going to go to, and this is going to sound like I'm just ranting about pet peeves. Starbucks has a really good process for order taking, whether it's in person or in the app. Um, I was at a restaurant recently where the server was taking the order for 4 people and was never once writing something down. And then sure enough, server had to come back and ask, wait, was it this or was it that?
Yeah.
I try to be really calm of like, gosh, pen and paper.
Yeah.
That's a very
Well,
proven. technology.
Was it a server in a regular restaurant, or are you referring to Starbucks in that?
No, it was not at a Starbucks. It was a sit down
Yeah.
restaurant.
So classic servers in high class restaurants, it was a sign of the expertise of the server to not have to write things down. And you see that still in some of the older servers, especially in some of the older establishments that have been
Mhm.
there, like in New York City, you'll see a lot of this where they don't write anything down, but they also hardly ever get it wrong. And so
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how they hold all that in their head. I
Well,
don't think I could do it. But it's interesting how it's almost revered to not write things down in those types of restaurants.
but everyone's human, and everyone's going to have a moment where they forget. Now, I'm glad that server came back to clarify
Yeah.
instead of being wrong back to the kitchen. I don't know, the voice of this customer, I'm not impressed with doing it via memory. I'd rather see the pad of paper, or nowadays it's an iPad type device.
Right.
Um,
Right.
that's just me. So anyway, I had to get that off my chest. You were about to say something.
Well, I was going to say, we've been talking a lot about mechanical kinds of things, and a lot of when I've talked with people about mistake proofing, error proofing, a lot of people say, "Yeah, but we only deal with information and data and creative or engineering or transactional process or whatever." So how do you do that with human error being so rampant? And I loved how you touched on things like a simple read back. Was one thing where information can be more reliably conveyed if there's a read back involved. And I don't think we said this in the course, but since you and I both write, the technique of reading out loud what you've written
Mm-hmm.
so that you can actually catch it. The ear will catch way more than the eye will. And so there's things like that. There's reading backwards,
Mm-hmm.
through a sentence to also see typos or errors, and, spell check, grammar check, all that stuff's lovely and wonderful, but it's not perfect. And so, there's all of those things that can happen. And then there's just getting clearer on what the standards are, and making sure that everyone is operating from the same page on what qualifies as good work being passed on versus it being error prone. And I love when we do mapping and we get
Mm-hmm.
cross-functional teams, there's almost always some tension between one or two people or teams. And when we map out the current state, almost always it'll be revealed that someone isn't getting what they think they need or
Mm-hmm.
what they should have to do their job. And the people supplying it had no clue that that's what they needed.
Right.
And that this friction gets, like, it just melts away.
Mm-hmm.
And I
I've
think
seen that.
friction come back. It's so cool. But it's like, wow, we need to get out of our ways of success, because it is that simple to solve what's otherwise seemingly a human error that can't be solved.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I like that.
And there's the two mindsets. There's we can't solve that problem, and then at the risk of sounding a little Pollyanna, I've heard people say, well, maybe what you mean is we haven't figured it out yet. One is very definitive of like, we
Right.
can't solve that fixed mindset, I guess, versus a growth mindset of, well, let's work on it. Let's make it 50% better this year, and then let's keep at it. Toyota still has final inspection at the end of their assembly lines.
Mm-hmm.
As much as they focus on built-in quality, and for as long as they've been focusing on, the techniques and the culture,
Yeah.
I'm sure they make this determination of like, well, we're still not outputting perfect cars. Final inspection, technically, we wouldn't call that waste. It's
Mm-hmm.
still better than not having the final inspection. And Toyota doesn't have a zero harm safety record. I've seen
Right.
data and charts when I've gone through plants, and I'm not saying, I'm not saying shame on them for not getting to zero. I think it goes to show it can be really difficult, but you need to keep working at it. That's why I wear the zero hat. Like it can be an inspirational goal when leaders are working together with everybody in the organization, or it can make people roll their eyes if it's just a slogan and people are
Mm-hmm.
being punished
Mm-hmm.
for
Well,
mistakes or injuries.
one of the things about final inspection that I like to remind people of when we're working with teams is that the final inspection may need to be in place, especially short term, while you're figuring out
Mm-hmm.
all the root causes and getting rid of the mistakes in the whole process that leads up to final inspection. But the one thing that's different at Toyota than most organizations that have final inspection is that heavy culture of that quality at the source in process quality fixing before it gets to final inspection. So that's the rare instance of finding something at final inspection that needs to be, either reworked or, hopefully not scrapped at that point. And so what I find fascinating is the research has been proven it's been, the same results over and over, that when you have final inspection, there is this relaxation that happens in the middle of the process where people go, oh, well, someone else will catch it.
That's risky.
And as an author, I wonder if you've had this. I've had this where and the next step is my own editor, not the publisher's editor, but my own editor. And I've caught myself being a little less diligent because I know someone else that's even more skilled than me is going to be looking at it. And it's like this weird psychological thing. And I have to go, no, stop it, Karen, you're the quality at the source gal. And so I think that's a difference between having final inspection where it's catching things way downstream from where they should have been caught and possibly never occurred in the first place, versus kind of responsible final inspection with a strong quality at the source and don't pass anything on.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. And I think, final inspection needs to not be just the fixer of the problem. It needs to kick off the feedback loop back to the source. And, that cultural backsliding that could occur. Maybe you address that by really proactively, making it a sense of pride that you caught your own mistake. In companies that are more on the side of rewarding the mistake. Now, if you have a reasonably functional culture, people aren't going to be intentionally creating problems so they can get rewarded for it.
Right.
I mean, people want to do good work. Some people would be cynical and say like, oh, well, or, those software developers are going to just create bugs so they can get rewarded for fixing them. I really don't think developers work that way.
No, first of all, they hate fixing bugs.
Yeah.
And so, like that, they're not going to create their own drama and their own angst. What was I going to say? There's something about so the thing about quality at the source I also get really kind of high on is this notion of pacing the work so that people have time to do self-inspection before they pass the work on. And that, rushing work pressure that a lot of the performance objectives and goals give people doesn't serve quality well at all, because they don't have time to even really do their own inspection before they pass it on. So I have an image that I love using every once in a while in talks and things like that. It's a big ball of like garbage. It's like a gigantic, and there's a person beside it, this huge ball. And it says, let me get the right order. Don't make junk, don't accept junk, don't pass junk on. So it's like you have three obligations as a worker in this process. Don't make it, don't take it, don't pass it. So,
and I think part of what helps make that happen is leaders realizing, the command to them, if you will, is don't punish junk. Because when you punish junk, people start hiding junk. They start passing it on. They start, and again, and I've heard people say, like, well, we have to punish people for mistakes, because if we don't, that just gives them permission to make more. And you rolled your eyes, and that's my reaction of like, I don't think it works that way. The harm that comes from punishing mistakes gets, so it becomes hard to see. But that's something leaders need to pay attention to. And in the podcast, my favorite mistake, and the book, The Mistakes That Make Us, I've documented some of those stories from Toyota where leaders apologized to the frontline worker because they put them in a position where a mistake was possible. Like, that's just such a different mindset than most companies that would say, you screwed up, you put the wrong chemical into the machine, you better not do it again, or else.
Right. I think there's one exception to the rule that I've noticed over the years that I haven't quite ever figured out exactly what to do with this reality. But I do think there are cases when the work system isn't at fault, and that there's someone that for some reason just can't stop making a mistake, or can't
Mm-hmm.
stop a behavior that leads to mistakes, or can't, and when I say can't, I think kind of unwilling. And so, I've seen situations I personally have been involved with where I've, noticed a pattern and have raised it. And we've had a great conversation about what's behind that pattern. And
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't seem to ever really improve, no
Mm-hmm.
matter what we try.
Yeah.
And I think there are those rare, thankfully, cases where someone's either not well suited for the work, it's not a good job fit,
Right.
or something. There's something that's not quite right. It's not a bad person. It's
Sure.
just they're
Sure.
not in a role that can help them be successful. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's perfectly fine to move people out of those roles
Yeah.
into something they can be more successful at.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. And some of that selection and placing somebody into a job can be a part of the system. Are we rotating jobs so that people are staying mentally fresh? That's part of
Hmm?
the system design. You posted on LinkedIn recently an article about talking. What is it called? The slow work movement.
The slow work movement, yes.
Because I have a bad habit that I think is either innate or it was somehow imprinted on me or ingrained at a young age. I have this tendency to try to rush through my work and like focusing on completing the work instead of focusing on even like enjoying the work as I'm doing it.
Hmm.
And that's something I've been trying to be more mindful of. And some of that comes down to like literally, like I can type very quickly and I type pretty accurately. It's more effective to intentionally try to slow down my typing just a
Hmm.
little bit.
Yeah. Less
And look, a lot.
tracking.
Mhm. And
Hmm.
a lot of mistakes get corrected automatically, so I don't have to go back to fix them anymore. Some things get auto corrected into the wrong word.
Right.
Um,
Well, I think a lot of times when you have a propensity to rush, there's something deep in someone's background that is a little bit of the spark. Maybe not the whole reason for that behavior, but a spark. Like it could have been a very impatient parent. Come on, go. It could have been a coach. It could have been a teacher. It could have
mhm,
been a first boss. It could be any number of things where someone was the opposite of being methodical, intentional, deliberate.
right.
That measured, and the people that responded to that post of mine about slow work, a lot of them had the same phrase that is what my phrase is: go slow to go fast.
Right.
Their phrase was, there were like three people that said the same phrase, and it's very poignant.
Mhm.
And of course I can't remember it. It
Oh,
was,
I put you on the spot by bringing up.
no, I want to think for like 10 more seconds. It
Okay.
was, because it's a really good phrase. Smooth. Let's see. Slow is smooth. Smooth is, no, wait. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Wait. Yeah. Smooth
Yeah.
is fast is the last part of it.
Right.
So
Working
slow is
smooth is
smooth,
a good.
and smooth is fast. And
Yeah.
that's true, because you're not having to jerk around and fix things, and and all that interruption that can happen when things
Mhm.
aren't going well. So
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in slowing down and
And that comes.
self-inspecting
I'm sorry.
and self-inspecting.
And self-inspecting.
Hmm.
And that also applies, I think, to speaking, whether it's reading a bio or an introduction, or even just speaking extemporaneously in a conference. Uh, Sometimes trying to just slow the pace of speaking down a little bit, not so much that it seems super noticeable, but words like milliliter become a speed bump if you try saying it too fast. So that's why they say 750 ml, right?
Yeah,
It's a lot
it's
easier.
true. Words get like there. It's easy to slur over them when you're going fast.
Yeah. So one other thing we were going to talk about here today is something that we kind of hashed out and talked through very early in the planning of this mistake proofing course. Um, Back to words and terminology, and we're both writers, and we think about words a lot. Mistakes versus errors, are these different things? I've heard some people, including yourself, say they're different, and I was taught that they're really more of a synonym. So I'm not trying to say, nah, told you. I don't know. I was right. No, but I think I influenced. We came to agreement. So
Yeah.
now that I've framed it that way. I'm sorry. Could you share a little bit of your journey on, like, thinking about those words?
Yeah. So my thought about them has historically been that error is the kinder term and that
Mm.
mistake has baggage, that mistake
Hmm.
has blame implied. But when someone raised that point on that post that, the first post when the course came out, the
Yeah, on
guy that,
LinkedIn. Hmm.
yeah, on LinkedIn, the guy that mentioned that they aren't the same and that a mistake is, necessarily blaming, I pointed out to him that in the process of writing the course with you, we
Yeah.
went to many sources for definitions
Hmm.
to see what the dictionaries of the world said, and they were synonyms, like clearly synonyms.
Yeah.
And then I posited back to this guy that perhaps the difference is very much about how words have been used and in what settings.
Hmm.
And that maybe if error was given that finger wagging that mistakes got, it
Yeah.
would be the bad guy.
Yeah.
And so I have come to believe that they're synonyms. Thank you, Mark.
Well,
So
Well, I mean, I'm being pedantic if I'm pointing to dictionary definitions, but I mean, your point, the guy who commented on LinkedIn, and that was a Toyota retiree who's worked with a lot of other companies and other industries. I'm not doubting him that, as he said, his experience is that when he's worked with other organizations, the word mistake causes a lot of heartburn or it's seen more negatively. We've seen that with the word problem. I know
yep,
Toyota people have run across that.
yep,
I've run across that. I've learned from Toyota people. The language matters, or it means different things in different settings. And I think that former Toyota person, Pat, was of course at Toyota. No, I mean, you're not supposed to blame people for these things, but other organizations do, and that's part of the challenge when we work with different organizations. But I think of my thought process on this over time. Well, I've heard some people say error is more significant than a mistake, like
mm,
its degree of impact. I'm like, I don't know if that's how some people look at it that way. John Grout, who's an expert in, he tends to say mistake proofing, but when we've done podcasts and discussions, to him, the words are synonyms.
mm-hmm,
And we see the translations of poka-yoke.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes people say that means error proofing. Sometimes they say it means mistake proofing. As
right,
long as we're not saying fool proofing, right?
right,
The old
or idiot proofing.
idiot proofing, the old dummy proofing.
Yeah,
The original Japanese phrase "baka yoke"
mhm,
means idiot proofing,
yeah,
and they stopped using that because it was disrespectful and inaccurate. But I pointed to the dictionary. Forgive me for that, but dictionary.com says an error is a deviation from accuracy or correctness, semicolon, a mistake, as in action or speech. Then when you look at its definition of mistake, it says an error in action, calculation, opinion, or judgment caused by poor reasoning, carelessness, insufficient knowledge, etc. So it's circular. Like if you were brand new to the language, these words are pointing at each other. Maybe other dictionaries do a better job. But
yeah. I think the one thing I do feel pretty firmly about, the error mistake thing. I'm now agnostic, although I do tend to use the word error more. I think that's because I grew up
yeah,
thinking that mistake was bad and error was good. Now I'm not going to change that one yet.
sure.
But one of the things I do think is that there's a continuum, and when you look at the 8 wastes, for example, or 7 wastes plus underutilization of people or lost creativity that we've added in the West, the waste. Sometimes I see it framed as rework. Sometimes I see it as the mistake. Sometimes I see it as um, a defect. And to me, it's a continuum. So there's an error or mistake that creates a defect, which requires rework. So to me, it's a continuum. The original sin, as it were, is the
Yeah,
error, mistake.
yeah.
Not the rework. And I mean, sorry, not the defect and not the rework. It's that original one. Now, if you want to talk about what the outcome was of it, then that's the defect.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the waste is actually rework.
Yeah.
It's the result of all those. So as long as people are sure that and understand that there's 3 pieces of that puzzle
Mm-hmm.
that it all causes waste, then
Yeah.
then I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good if people say error. I use the word error sometimes to mix it up. I mean them as synonyms.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just goes to show the complexity of language and implications of different words in different settings. I mean, if you had felt really strongly that the course should have been called error proofing, I could have run with that,
Mm-hmm.
because what we teach in the course is what matters, I
Right.
think, more than the terminology.
Right.
If we could call them whatever we call it, gaffes, blunders,
Mm.
flub ups. You could call it all
Other
sorts
ups.
of.
Other ups.
Yeah, I mean, some of those phrases do sound to me inherently more blamey.
Mm-hmm.
I would tend to avoid those phrases, but I could see having a workplace culture where somehow it fit of like, oh, we do an award for the flub up of the month and we celebrate when people report flub ups, and like they could have a completely blame free culture
Right.
around a different word.
Now,
That's
see,
what I
I
would
don't
want.
like going that far with the cultural aspects of accepting that errors will occur and being respectful. I actually think that the average leader would roll his her their eyes at that, and I think it's justified.
Yeah.
Because that's like, oh, it's not okay to make
I,
mistakes or
yeah.
errors. Never okay. It's a fact that it is common, and
Yeah.
and we're not going to beat people up for doing so, because it's typically not the person's fault for doing
Yeah.
it. But I don't think we also need to celebrate them either. I think that's a little too gimmicky for my taste.
I hear you. I tend not to use the word celebrate errors. I use words more like acknowledge
Yes, acknowledge.
mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And there, I've interviewed people on the podcast whose companies are doing quite well, and they've been doing something like that. But I think a lot of it is situational.
Yeah,
Like if you're on more of a innovation or scientific front, and it's inevitable that some experiments won't work out, that's a different
yeah,
situation than I would never give an award for medication error of the month. That would
yeah,
be completely inappropriate.
yes.
Different situation.
So last night I thought of you, and I almost went back and rewound. I was watching a Stephen Colbert episode on
Mhm.
DVR, and he had I forget his name. Is it Tyson? Tyson, the inventor of the vacuum and the hand
Dyson.
thing. Dyson.
Yeah,
James, is it James
I
Dyson?
think it is.
Yeah. So he was a guest. I had never heard him interviewed. He was delightful, and he
Maybe
used I think it was Einstein that said something about I have failed X number of times. It might have been Edison.
Edison.
Edison,
I
yeah.
haven't failed. I've found 10,000 ways that didn't work or
Right.
something like that.
And he was talking about his original vacuum cleaner experiment and how many he had, something like 5,000 different prototypes. And he said, those weren't 5,000 failures. Those were,
Yeah.
5,000, iterations to the successful one, or something like that. And I thought of you because
Yeah.
he was talking about his mistakes in a very
Yeah.
positive.
Yeah. And I think regardless of the situation, whether it's an innovation mistake that we can be a little more lighthearted about, or
Mhm.
a serious process problem that hurts or kills somebody, the key is acknowledging it and learning from
Mhm.
it. Right. So these innovators, Thomas Edison wasn't repeating the same mistake 10,000 times.
Right.
Some hospitals
He was
repeat
ignorant.
the same mistakes over and
Yeah.
over again, which is
And some aircraft manufacturers do as well.
yeah,
Unfortunately,
yeah,
that's a very high stakes mistake, as well as medication error.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, quick. Think of another Starbucks example. That's how I try to lighten the mood.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't. I
Not to
think.
pick on Starbucks. I mentioned Starbucks because I'm a frequent customer there.
Yeah.
So
I'm a fan.
um, I'm a fan. If I was a fan of another coffee shop, I'm sure I would notice that coffee
Yes.
shop's
Exactly.
mistakes. Well, Karen, let's go ahead and wrap up
Okay.
this segment of our long-standing podcast. 50
Perpetual
minutes that
podcast.
we 50 minutes that we decided to record today. Karen, tell everyone before we wrap up about TKMG Academy, the website, and a little bit more. I mean, as much as we both like the mistake proofing courses, there's a lot of great instructors and content
Yeah.
there. as we wrap up, tell people more broadly about TKMG Academy.
Thank you. Yeah, so we started this about 5 years ago, and it was our attempt to get more knowledge into more people's hands across the globe in a more efficient way so that companies can start reaping the benefits or continue or deepen the benefits of what happens when you perfect processes and get great work environments and build amazing cultures and all the benefits that brings. And we have kind of started with little, a course here, a course there, some practices, some methods, some philosophy. We're pretty how-to, so everything's pretty practical. There's maybe a little bit of theory to understand context, but pretty practical. We've got 25 of them right now, and we launch about 6 a year. And we're just really passionate about it. They're about an hour in duration. So we have a couple that go to 2 hours. And they're broken into these little micro learning modules. So it's easy. There's no excuse for not learning. You can have it with your coffee or your juice in the morning and just watch one. And we're excited for the future and more on the way. So tkmgacademy.com is the URL for the website.
Yeah. And we'll put links in the show notes. They can go directly to the mistake proofing course and they can register for that individually, or there's a subscription that gives you access to everything in the catalog, right? That's an annual basis.
Right. It is an annual subscription, access to the full library. And if you want to buy it for a full team, if you have a team or even the whole organization to get people really sensitized to mistakes and what you can do about them, then we have bulk purchases as well, bulk licenses.
Okay. Well, people will check that out. And I know some of my colleagues at KaiNexus have gone through your value stream map. The value stream mapping course was you, or did Mike? That was you. Yeah. And they've gone through, I think, a course on strategy deployment. And I've heard really good things about those courses. And the bits and pieces I've looked at are really good too. I can go through and deepen my own learning. So I
learn too. I mean, every time we do, like I learned from you as much as I, contributed also. It's just looking at things through these different lenses is always so cool. Very, very instructional.
Yeah. And I learned some things from you. So thank you for a good collaboration.
Thank you.
On that. So I hope people will check it out. Karen, it was a lot of fun 5 times. Like I need to make a coffee mug or a sweatshirt or something that I can send to people who are in the 5-time club. There's about 10 of you, I think.
Wow. Yeah, it's thank you. It's an honor to be in the club.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. It's always fun, and we'll have it back again sometime.
Thank you, Mark, and we'll see you soon. We'll be podcasting probably tomorrow. Our informal podcast. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.